If you're in the business of teaching, you can never learn too much about organizational change. How, in the words of Jim Collins, do you mobilize a community to move from good to great? From long-standing competence and comfort to taking on new challenge? How do you persuade colleagues that to teach students to lead is not just a valuable extra, but a moral imperative? Inside of the gcLi community, few have answered these questions as fully as Samantha Brennan. In 2006, she was sent to the second leadership lab to gain resources to bring back to the River School in Weston, Mass. She hit the ball out of the park. In this Edge interview, find out how. Well, good morning, Sam. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Ted.
So you have done such extraordinary work at River School in building leadership. I wonder if you can tell us in a nutshell, what have you done there? When did it start? How did you go about it? What have you done?
I attended gcLi and was really excited about bringing it back to Rivers. Our head was really on board, and actually, ironically, as we looked at our mission statement, the last statement of our mission statement talks about students needing, or the world needing their leadership. And so we really weren't doing anything to teach leadership. In fact, at the time, it was sort of a controversial statement that leadership could be taught. And so we began to look at what we were doing, and most of the time we were putting students in leadership positions, but we were not actually giving them any training, and yet we had pretty high expectations for their performance in those places. So we compiled a group of faculty, middle school and upper school faculty, and we started to meet and define the questions that we wanted to investigate, as well as how did we define leadership. Obviously, things have changed a lot in the leadership world since 2006, where many more people believe that leadership can be taught. But at the time, that was our biggest hurdle. And so we started with the faculty and administrators and even the board, and really started to define leadership as being your best self and positively influencing others.
Sam, let me pick up two threads there. So the first thread is, I love this comment. We had high expectations for our student leaders, but we weren't actually doing anything to train them to lead.
Right.
I think that is true of a lot of schools.
I think that has been an essential element of getting faculty on board, because we can count to a number of students over the years who we really thought would be great leaders, and yet we could name X, Y, or Z quote-unquote failures that they had, or how they had disappointed us over the years in the role as a TA or a class co-president or whatever it might be. And so using the energy of the faculty to say, yeah, that was really frustrating. I felt like they could have done a great job and they didn't, was what we leveraged in order to build this idea that leadership can be taught and leadership should be taught, both in an educational setting, but especially when we have students in leadership positions.
And if they're not leading, maybe it's because of us and not so much them.
Right. I think that's very true. I think they all have the ability, especially in our schools where students have pretty high emotional intelligence, they all have the ability to lead in their own way. And so how we define leadership, whether it be that they follow a prescribed list of these are the things that you do as a leader in this community, or we give them more adaptive challenges and big questions and encourage their critical thinking. I think in that way we've really seen students be way more successful than we ever could have imagined.
Can you give us one or two examples of a student who's really done this successful work?
Sure. So I always think back to last year. We had an upper school dance. We hadn't had a dance in a long time. And certainly when we were very clear about what the chaperoning responsibilities needed to be for the adults and where we were going to stand and how we were going to let students in, and kind of us being in charge of all those parameters. We had a number of student leaders last year, but one in particular who said, I think we can have a dance. I think it can be at this time of year. And I feel totally confident that we can get the word out that students should be appropriate and that they can have a really fun time. And so I showed up as the dean of students a little bit late, and the student was standing and leading a group of faculty in how the dance was going to be chaperoned. That she had scouted it out, and she had a whole set of rules about how the chaperones should do that, and clearly had gotten the message out to all the students that this was a time to be appropriate and have fun. And it was certainly a highlight of my experience as the dean of students.
Probably a highlight for some of the faculty
Yes.
too. That's great. So how did you take this student and give her some of these tools and some of the confidence and the know-how to be able to do what she did. What are some of the key pieces of how you build leadership at Rivers?
She's a student who came in with a lot of natural ability for sure and great ideas, and I certainly can't take credit for it. Kate Wade, who is our in charge of our school council, did a lot of the great work with her directly, but we paved a path where she felt comfortable asserting herself as a leader, that she felt she could go out on a limb socially to stand up for what she believed in. We have set up culture where student leadership is appreciated and not seen as, the student who, wants to please the faculty or whatever it might be, that genuine leadership is really respected by our student body. And I believe that her teachers really had all given her a lot of opportunities in the classroom to practice her leadership skills and to build on them, and gave her feedback along the way on her public speaking and her kind of how she carries herself and all of that to enhance her natural leadership abilities.
So if we drill down and we go really nitty gritty, how do you do it? I mean, so how do you have leadership trainings? Do you have formal mechanisms whereby certain teachers know that they're the ones who are going to be giving feedback? Do you have training for how to give feedback?
Sure. So we really started at Rivers with the idea of teachable moments, which is really at the foundation of gcLi and the concept of effective feedback. So we've given a lot of training to our faculty about the value of taking the moments that you have to either give positive feedback or to give some critical feedback in a way that makes a difference for a student and shows them you're on their side and you're going to be there to watch them grow and try again. So I think the faculty really, whether it be, a conversation after class or during a practice, an athletics practice or whatever it might be, just see this as part of their job. And that was a big part of our faculty training, was creating the buy-in for that it was worth taking time. We've changed our daily schedule to allow a little bit more time where those interactions can take place. So that's really very subtle at Rivers. If you were to walk around, you wouldn't necessarily notice it right away, but I think if you looked carefully at what those conversations are, you would see it. We do have student leadership retreats, and those have happened in a variety of formats over the years, depending on our school schedule and all kinds of things. We're always trying to hit the exact sweet spot and use the energy of the group of faculty called the Leadership Committee in terms of what they're excited to do. So that's, public speaking, a group dynamics, some scenarios applying what they know, what they think in tough situations, a lot of high fits. We talk a lot about high fits and, increasing the heat and making them recognize that being a leader is a privilege, but it comes with a lot of responsibility and it can be really hard. And it's okay at Rivers to say, this is really hard. I thought this was going to be fun. I was psyched to get elected and this is really hard, and can you help me? So all of the faculty advisors to clubs and organizations have some additional training. So in the example of Kate Wade working with our school council, she has a lot of training in terms of how to work with the students directly. And so this particular student was a beneficiary of that as well.
And for those who don't know, Heifetz is Ronald Heifetz, who teaches leadership at the Kennedy School associated with Harvard University, right?
Yes. I think a lot of his books about how leadership can be taught have been really influential to us at Rivers.
Will you tell us again, what is the Rivers definition of leadership?
Sure. So it's really based a lot on who we are at Rivers, that we had to be really careful as we define leadership to make sure that it fit our particular school. So sort of the student version of it is leadership is being your best self and positively influencing others. So we believed that leadership doesn't look any particular one way, that it's about being your best self and knowing your strengths and using those strengths to positively influence others. So knowing yourself and being really good yourself, and however you define good, is about your character, but then leadership is using that character to help others, whether it be in the classroom or your family or in the world beyond Rivers. But we actually spent a year, I think there were 8 of us, middle school and upper school faculty. We had several half-day retreats. We met weekly. We did a lot of reading. We talked to a ton of schools. I was at gcLi. I attended some other conferences and really tried to network. We looked at kind of things like the Harvard Business Review and what was happening in the world outside of education in terms of leadership development and defining leadership. And we eventually happened upon a report called Smart and Good Schools that defined some of the character education as performance character and moral character. And when we dove into those definitions, we really saw that performance character was a lot about our core value of perseverance, and moral character was very in line with our core value of integrity. So we landed on that, and we're able to say being your best self is about having performance character and moral character.
It's an amazing process to think that you would facilitate a group of adults during the course of an entire school year to come to that pithy definition. But the way you describe it is wonderful because it shows the kind of rigor that went into it and the kind of buy-in that happened. And now every time I've had the good fortune to speak with a number of teachers from Rivers, because Rivers has sent a lot of people to gcLi, and I visited the school, and it's absolutely clear that that definition is a backbone, maybe the backbone of the Rivers approach to developing leadership.
Yeah, it definitely is. It was an interesting process of thinking about who would be on that committee and how they would engage in the process, given that it was a pretty novel concept at the school. I put together a group of people who I thought liked to think outside the box and were good communicators and would respect each other. And so it was amazing for a group to come together on a totally voluntary basis. And I'd say of the 7 of us who are still on the committee, 3 of us were in that original group.
Wow. Do you like developing leadership in students?
I would say that it's my favorite part of my job, that no matter what I've done, whether I go back to thinking about working with small children when I was a camp counselor or now in the Dean of Students role, everywhere in between I've really been trying to teach leadership, and I didn't necessarily know that's what it was. So at the core of my kind of why I'm in education, it's all about teaching leadership.
And why do you like it so much?
I think it's a really positive outlook on everything from classroom management to social life of a school to discipline even. It's a really great way to look at how do you educate people to be their best selves. I know it sounds cliche now, but really to think about within each of us we have a real drive to be putting ourselves out there in the world and helping others. And so to be able to help students find that person within themselves and define that for themselves so that they can really use it feels very hopeful.
Personally, what was your biggest takeaway from going to the gcLi?
For me personally, it was about changing school culture. It was about being motivated by a group of professionals, the gcLi faculty, and feeling like, although they weren't with me at Rivers at the time, feeling like I had them in my back pocket. That's been a great association for me in terms of my professional development and my personal satisfaction. And knowing that there were others who had faith in me to be able to change a culture that felt, at the time I was a school counselor, and it felt like I wasn't necessarily the leader of the school, but to be able to dig deep and look at what our school really was, a school that I believe wholeheartedly in the mission, and to be empowered by our head of school and really at a place where people buy into it and are excited about it.
Samantha, any last words of wisdom for the teacher who wants to take on this challenge and this opportunity?
I'd say in looking at the gcLi alums who I've sort of stayed in touch with or know kind of through the gcLi connections, how you take this information can vary from person to person. So whether it be Robert Franz using the classroom as a way of doing it, or looking at how service plays into it, or whatever it might be, using your particular sphere of influence to help students develop their leadership skills, that it doesn't have to look like whole school climate change and working with the faculty and all of that. It can be really a small project, and that if it's good and if people are excited about it, it's pretty likely that it will grow and affect the community as a whole.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience with us.
Thank you, Ted.